Just through this verse. Brahmanda te kona bhagyavan jiva. Brahmanda brahmite kona bhagyavan jiva. Guru Krishna prasade paya bhakti lata bija. Guru Krishna prasade paya bhakti lata bij. Brahmanda brahmiti kona bhagya. So I'll do that again. Brahmanda brahmite kona bhagyavan ajiv. Brahmite kona bhagyavan. Guru Krishna prasade paya bhakti lata bij. Brahmanda brahmite kona bhagyavan ajiv. Guru Krishna prasade paya bhakti lata bij. Brahmanda brahmite kona bhagyavan ajiv. Guru Krishna prasade paya bhakti lata bij. Please chant. Brahmanda brahmite kona bhagyavan ajiv. Guru Krishna prasade paya bhakti lata bij. Brahmanda brahmite kona bhagyavan ajiv. Guru Krishna prasade paya bhakti lata bij. Brahmanda brahmite kona bhagyavan ajiv. Guru Krishna prasade paya bhakti lata bij. Brahmanda brahmite, wandering in this universe. Kona, some bhagyavan, most fortunate. Jiva, living being. Guru, of the spiritual master. Krishna, of Krishna. Prasade, by the mercy. Paya, gets. Bhaktilata, of the creeper of devotional service. Bija, the seed. Translation. According to their karma, all living entities are wandering throughout the entire universe. Some of them are being elevated to the upper planetary systems, and some are going down into the lower planetary systems. Out of many millions of wandering living entities, one who is very fortunate gets an opportunity to associate with a bona fide spiritual master by the grace of Krishna. By the mercy of both Krishna and the spiritual master, such a person receives the seed of the creeper of devotional service. According to their karma, all living entities are wandering throughout the entire universe. Some of them are being elevated to the upper planetary systems, and some are going down into the lower planetary systems. Out of many millions of wandering living entities, one who's very fortunate gets an opportunity to associate with a bona fide spiritual master by the grace of Krishna. By the mercy of both Krishna and the spiritual master, such a person receives the seed of the creeper of devotional service. Srila Prabhupada's purport. When we speak of Brahmanda, we refer to the whole universe or to the cluster of many millions of universes. In all the universes, there are innumerable planets and there are innumerable living entities upon those planets, in the air, on land, and in water. There are millions and trillions of living entities everywhere, and they are engaged by Maya in suffering and enjoying the results of their fruitive activity, life after life. This is the position of the materially conditioned living entities. Out of many of these living entities, one who is actually fortunate, Bhagyavan, comes in contact with a bona fide spiritual master by Krishna's mercy. Krishna is situated in everyone's heart, and if one desires something, Krishna fulfills one's desire. If the living entity by chance or fortune comes in contact with the Krishna consciousness movement and wishes to associate with that movement, Krishna, who is situated in everyone's heart, gives them a chance to meet a bona fide spiritual master. This is called Guru Krishna Prasad. Krishna is prepared to bestow his mercy upon all living entities, and as soon as a living entity desires the Lord's mercy, the Lord immediately gives him an opportunity to meet the bona fide spiritual master. Such a fortunate person is fortified by both Krishna and the spiritual master. He's helped from within by Krishna and from without by the spiritual master. Both are prepared to help the sincere living being become free from material bondage. How one can become this fortunate can be seen in the life of Srila Narada Muni. In his previous life, he was born of a maidservant. Although he was not born into a prestigious position, his mother was fortunately engaged in rendering service to some Vaishnavas. When these Vaishnavas were resting during the Chaturmasya period, the boy Narad took the opportunity to engage in their service. Taking compassion upon the boy, the Vaishnavas offered him the remnants of their food. By serving these Vaishnavas and obeying their orders, the boy became the object of their sympathy, and by the Vaishnavas' unknown mercy, he gradually became a pure devotee. In the next life, he was Narada Muni, the most exalted of Vaishnavas and the most important guru and acharya of Vaishnavas. Following in the footsteps of Narada Muni, this Krishna consciousness movement is rendering service to humanity by giving everyone a chance to come in contact with Krishna. If one is fortunate, he becomes intimately related with this movement. Then, by the grace of Krishna, one's life becomes successful. Everyone has dormant Krishna Bhakti, love for Krishna, and in the association of good devotees, that love is revealed. As stated in Caitanya Caritamrta Madhya 22.107, Nityasiddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabuma Naya Shravanadi Shuddha Chitte Karaye Udaya. Dormant devotional service to Krishna is within everyone. Simply by associating with devotees, hearing their good instructions, and chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, one awakens his dormant love for Krishna. In this way, one acquires the seed of devotional service. Guru Krishna Prasadi Pai Bhaktilata Beach. Om Agyantamanandasya Gyanjana Salakaya Chachur Militam Yena Tasman Shri Guruve Namaha Bhakam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Lagate Grim Yatki Patamam Bande Shri Grim Dinataranam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. According to the karma, all living entities are wandering throughout the entire universe. Some of them are being elevated to upper planetary systems, and some are going down into the lower planetary systems. Out of many millions of wandering living entities, one who's very fortunate gets an opportunity to associate with a bona fide spiritual master by the grace of Krishna. By the mercy of both Krishna and the spiritual master, such a person receives the seed of the creeper of devotional service. So the first point Prabhupada makes in the purport here is he refers to the whole universe or the cluster of many millions of universes. So this is called the cosmic manifestation. So just like in the back of the temple, there's a picture here showing in the upper part of the picture, it's showing you Krishna in Goloka Vrindavan. In the spiritual world, where the spiritual world is called Vaikuntha, free from anxieties, and it's free from birth, death, old age, and disease. And so this is, of all the spiritual planets, then Goloka Vrindavan is the center of a lotus, the whorl of a lotus, and the other planets are like the petals. So that is the center of the entire spiritual and material world. And the material world we can see is the dark part. And that's considered to be just like a small dark cloud in the spiritual world. According to our frog-like mentality, we are like a frog in a well who thinks that our world is all there is. Just like if a frog is living in a well and it was born there and its whole existence is there, then it can't conceive of anything beyond that. So we're likened to that because we don't trust anything which is beyond our purview, beyond our conception. But Krishna is beyond our conception because we cannot imagine, that the cause of all causes, Sarva Karana Karanam, of the origin of all, Anadir Adir, is Govinda. Nobody can come to the conclusion that perhaps the absolute truth beyond even this impersonal oneness is a little blue cowherd boy. Who would come to that conclusion? It's not possible. If you did, then you're not going to have like a whole universal movement following it. Probably think, well, I could just come up with something imaginary as well. So when you read the pastimes of Krishna, you think, well, either someone who wrote this has got a very, very good imagination, or else there must be some truth to it, because it's so, they say that truth is stranger than fiction. So for us, living entities of the material world who are used to a kind of very not so blissful life, and the spiritual world is described as every step is a dance and every word is a song. And yesterday we did a program in Glasgow, and I was walking back to the car, and I was thinking, this is definitely not the spiritual world. People are not dancing unless they're very intoxicated, and they're not singing unless for the same reason. And then also, they're only singing their own song. It's not like the whole place is singing together. Sometimes they get this idea of, let's all work together. But people don't, because they've got different ideas. They don't have a common goal. They don't have a common denominator. In the spiritual world, Krishna is the cynosure of everyone's eye. He is like the focal point. But Krishna, he's not egotistic, demanding that he's the center of attention. He is just by default the original Supreme Personality of Godhead. And everyone is his parts and parcels. We are all parts and parcels, all living entities. So someone may think I'm male or female, or young, old, black, white, yellow, green, whatever, a crab, an insect, a bird. We may have these concepts of who we are. According to this verse, then we are wandering throughout the whole cosmic manifestation into different species of life. And when we attain that particular body, because we are attached to the material world, we identify with that body. Like when we were in the body of a dog or an insect or a fish, then we identified with that. We thought, oh, I'm a small fish, there's a big fish, I better disappear. We're thinking like that. Or if we're with a big fish and we see a small fish, they think, oh, that small fish is food for me. And even as a plant, we identify with that. Even though we're suffering, still we identify with this body which is causing so much suffering, this mind which is associating with material world in so many ways. We create our own suffering. And this is also mentioned here in the verse, that according to our karma, then some are going up to reap the rewards, and some are going down to reap the fruits of their impious misdeeds. And even within this life, we experience a certain amount of happiness and distress. So it's considered that this earthly planet and this human form of life is the best opportunity for realizing Krishna and for getting out of this cycle of birth and death, this samsara. Because in the spiritual world, we're enjoying too much. When people are enjoying so much, even here, we did much door-to-door over the years, and sometimes you go up a nice long driveway, perfectly manicured garden, and you see like big cars, and obviously the people are well-to-do, and you chap on the door and say, we'd like to offer you a book on Krishna consciousness so you can get in touch with your real self. And say, I don't need God, I'm a self-made man. This is exactly what they're saying. And I said, well, that's okay, but you're enjoying very much just now, but it just takes a small adjustment and then everything turns sour. We've seen that one time we were on the same program. We were on the borders of Scotland. And we were traveling in a caravan for months on end. And we parked the caravan at one caravan site, and the man was very friendly. He was enjoying a nice life. Next year we come down, we thought, let's go and see Mr. What's his name, and we'll park there. He was a very friendly, favourable guy. So we pulled into the caravan site, chapped the door to see him, and the house had a very overhanging, gloomy atmosphere. And I was thinking, what's wrong here? And I could see him in the distance in a back room, looking very, very morose because, and his, I think it was one of his older children said, he's got cancer, he's not got long to live. And so within 1 year, from very happy, very friendly, everything's going well, to that. And of course, because we put all our eggs in the one basket, we think my happiness is dependent on this family, this house, this source of wealth, etc. And he was probably a well-liked person in the community because he was a very gregarious type of person. But then a slight adjustment in the body, and then everything which he sought his happiness in became then a source of misery. And this is what happens to us time and time again in the material world. We're all victims of the material energy. And it's this Krishna consciousness movement is here to tell us that we don't have to be. We can actually become Krishna conscious and go back to Godhead and become free from Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadi, birth, death, old age, and disease. And Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells us that for one who is born, death is certain. We don't know of anyone who's been born who hasn't died. Can they come forward and prove it? And also, for one who has died, birth is certain. So although our old friend was morose that he died, he's taken birth again in another species of life or another human form, most likely a human form because he was very friendly to the devotees. Prabhupada was on a morning walk. You can hear it in his recordings. Prabhupada was, the devotees would record his morning walks, his lectures, room conversations. They were smart enough to capture all the words on there so that they could remember these valuable instructions. So as he was walking along, then one person said good morning to him, and Prabhupada said, he chanted Hare Krishna to him, and he says his spiritual life has begun. So simply by being friendly to the devotees, then one's spiritual life begins. Krishna looks favorably upon that. On the other hand, we have to be also very careful not to burn to ashes the bhakti lata bija, or the seed of creeper of devotion. By offending the devotees, then we can lose the grace of Krishna. Even sinful activity is not as bad as Vaishnava aparad, offending devotees. So we have to be very careful not to do that. Sometimes we're very much attentive to following the four regulative principles, but our behavior amongst the devotees is not so good at times. And we can all look at ourselves and see that. It's not for us to think, yeah, I agree with you, I don't like the way that one behaves or that one behaves. It's up to us. It's self-realization. It's up to us to look and see, how can I improve? It's not up to us to improve everybody else. If we're in a situation where we are responsible for others, or we may give direction for their improvement, and it's up to them to take it or not. It's like Srila Prabhupada gave so many instructions to people. Now, whether they take it or not, that's up to them to benefit themselves from it. Just like the sun is shining on everybody, not in Scotland today, not that often either. But sometimes people don't want to be in the sun. They decide to stay indoors, or they put a parasol up. So similarly, Krishna he's not showing favoritism. He's making himself available to everyone, but there is a path which is nivritti and a path which is pravritti. Things which we must do if we want to make advancement on that path, and things we must avoid doing if we want to make advancement. So this is also corroborated in the Ishopanishad, that one should know the path of nescience and knowledge, or ignorance and knowledge, side by side. So it's not enough to know just simply what to do, it's also we have to know what to avoid and why we should avoid, and what are the consequences. And here the consequences are stated that according to our karma, then we go into perhaps higher form of life, Like sometimes people can, because they're so pious, they get in the body of a demigod, or they get to live within the demigod's domain, and they live for a long time, and they have great enjoyment, so much so that time passes very quickly, even though they have a long duration of life. Do you ever experience that you're having a great time, but the time flies? There's that saying, isn't it? Time flies, time crawls. But when you're suffering, time takes a long time to pass. One of the longest weekends I ever had was I had severe toothache on a Friday evening coming back from work, and I couldn't get to the dentist until Monday morning. And that weekend was just unbelievably long. Every moment was just like Lord Caitanya says, Yugaitam Nimeshena, Chakshusha Pravishaitam. You know, feeling separation from Krishna is like 12 years or more. So each moment was like 12 years or more in agony, and the time is passing so slowly. But then on other occasions, when you're enjoying yourself, it's like, oh, is that the concert over already? Or is that the game over already? Or is that the party over already? Oh, I don't want to go home. You see people, they go to the pub, right? And then they don't want to go out. It's closing time. It's like people just don't want to hear that bell, last orders. You know, they don't want to hear that. And then sometimes they have to employ security people to chuck people out of the nightclubs and the pubs because they don't want to leave, because they're enjoying and time is flying. So this is like when the demigods are enjoying life, they just get absorbed in that enjoyment. They're so distracted by it. They're not considering that this is going to come to an end, and then I'm going to be back down on the earthly plane again. And then I'm going to have to decide what I'm going to do again as a human being. And on the other hand, also, so being in higher planetary systems is not good enough. It's not conducive for spiritual life. They have an opportunity, but it's not so likely to take the opportunity. On the other hand, people who are suffering is too much, like in the lower planetary systems, then they're suffering so much that their mind is so disturbed that it's also not conducive for their spiritual life. Certainly they're filled with regret, remorse, and they're in the process of rectification. And once that's over, then they get a chance again, they're reinstated. They get another chance to figure out, what it's all about. And this is the start of spiritual life, Atato Brahma Jigyasa. That now we have this human form of life, it's time to inquire about knowledge after the self. So there's no need to wait for a better opportunity than we have just now. There is no better opportunity. We have the human form of life. We're on the earthly planet where there's a certain amount of suffering and a certain amount of enjoyment, so we can realize that according to what we do, we enjoy and we suffer. And we don't want to be stuck in the higher planetary system where we have to again come back down, or go to a lower planetary system where we have to suffer more and then come back up. So we have the human form of life on the earthly plane. We have the association of devotees. We have access to Shastras, which are the literary incarnation of God. We're associating with Krishna through these books. We have prasadam, food which is not only free from karma. We have these little cookbooks we distribute on the street called Higher Taste, Gourmet Guide to Karma-Free Diet. So people, they want to be free from suffering, and they also sometimes people take up this principle of veganism because they can understand, they've got compassion for the animals suffering and they don't want to be part of it. But still, the living entities, jivo, jivasya, jivanam, one living entity is food for another living entity. We cannot avoid this. We can't even just live on water. There's living entities there. We can't just live on air. We cannot. So every living entity is subsisting off other living entities. Even sometimes you'll see some insects living off a tree, or another creeper latching onto a tree. So we have to maintain this body. Even if we don't maintain this body, if we do nothing, and we think, okay, well, I'll just fast and I'll just die, I'm not going to cause any suffering to any living entity, then that's called action in inaction. there's a karmic reaction involved in that. So, of course, it's very commendable that people have compassion for the animals, but also the spirit soul is within the other living entities, within the trees, the plants, etc. So Krishna prescribes to us what we should eat. Patram pishpampalam toyam, yomi bhakti parachati tadaham bhakti paratam asami pratatmanaha. Krishna says, if you offer me with love and devotion, leaf, fruit, flower, or water, I will accept it. And Prabhupada elaborates on the purport, what foodstuffs Krishna is asking for. And if we do that, then there's no sinful reaction, there's no karma involved. This is called Akarma or Naish karma. So Akarma means some activity which has no reaction. And that is true for all aspects of devotional service. When whatever we're doing, if it's authorized in Krishna's service, then that is free from material reaction. If we're doing something independently, then we're answerable for that. That's why it's important that we get prescribed devotional service. So we have to consider, what do we want? Do we want to come back to this material world again? Or do we want to get out of this material world? This whole Krishna conscious movement was started for that purpose, to give the living entities a chance to get out of here. Even to the extent where there was one occasion where Prabhupada's disciples asked him about conservationism. And he said, just leave it to them, you just go back to Godhead. So in other words, there was another instance actually, a political argument going on, which was a high-profile political contention, and the devotees said to Prabhupada, should we take some stance on this? Should we join the march? Prabhupada said, just leave it to them, just go back to Godhead. So getting involved in things in the material world, we have to be very, very careful, because if it entangles us and we take an opinion and a stance, then, to be right or wrong, we're not so much attached to being right or wrong, we're attached to following the order of the spiritual master, which is our connection to getting out of the material world. That is our lifeline. So, of course, certainly morally, we can have a point of view. But in the example of the six Goswamis of Vrindavan, they were popular both with the gentle and with the ruffians. So they didn't take any stance. They were simply giving Krishna consciousness to everyone. They weren't seen as, because when you take a stance, that means people see that, oh, you're with that side, then we don't want you. So you actually start to exclude certain people if you take like a public stance on certain things. Of course, anything which is supportive of our regulative principles, then certainly we take a stance on that, but we don't necessarily have to get involved in tit-for-tat arguments by the materialists. And this is the example is given that just like someone's in a prison house, and when you're in the prison house, then the whole thing is we want to get out as soon as possible. Most people do. Some people become institutionalized, or they're a bit crazy and they want to stay in, or they're so badly behaved they don't get out. Or some people are in for good, so they kind of throw all caution to the wind and they don't care how they act. But when you're in the prison house, your intention generally is to get out. And rather than, okay, I'm not interested in getting out, I just want to make the prison cell nice. Let me get some nice curtains to hide the bars. I don't want to see the bars, so I'll get some nice curtains made up. And I'll get a nice picture of the countryside, rather than actually, well, let me just get out of here and see the real countryside and no bars restricting me. So our position is not to try to make the cell of this material world more comfortable, more pleasant. Certainly we're not looking to make life more difficult than it already is. Happiness and distress comes of its own accord according to our karma. And Lord Brahman says that one who patiently bears the reactions of their good and bad deeds, all the while performing devotional service, ultimately all the reactions are burnt to zero, and all that is left is pure devotional service. So therefore, one of the first lessons Krishna gives is we have to learn to tolerate. And sometimes we think we're tolerating this one or this situation or that, but basically what we're tolerating is our own reactions. So we have to learn to become a sage. A sage sees with equal vision, and the sage observes. We see what's happening, we see the material energy interacting with us and with others, but we don't necessarily have to react to it. Our reaction to it is Hare Krishna. So and this is also mentioned in the Bhagavatam, I think it was the third canto, that if one tries to make adjustments, tries to reverse situations, then simply we perpetuate that suffering. So much as we don't like to admit it, sometimes we like to all think that we're the good guys, and I wouldn't do any harm to anybody. We don't know what we've done in a past life out of ignorance or out of bad association. We can't just assume we were as good then as we are now. We don't know. But by some token of mercy, then we're here getting an opportunity for Krishna consciousness. And this token of mercy is that one got some opportunity to contact a devotee, and by the mercy of a devotee, we got the opportunity to contact Krishna consciousness. Mostly this comes about by one of three facets, one of three activities. Anybody like to name one of them? How do people get a contact with Krishna consciousness? Book distribution is one, yeah. Any more? Harinam, Prasadam. That's the three. That's the ISKCON trident. Books, Harinam and Prasadam. When all those things are there, then everything is auspicious. Some temples, according to their what workforce they have or what devotees they have, according to their skills, their availability, then they focus on one thing or another. Like some temples, they focus a lot on prasadam distribution, some focus a lot on Harinam, some focus on book distribution. And so as long as we try to have some kind of balance of all of these activities. Now these things are all very good because some people, they'll take prasadam, not even knowing that it's prasadam, but they won't take a book, or they won't necessarily want to be seen joining a Harinam party. But, they may take prasadam, and they may take prasadam, they wouldn't maybe take prasadam from a Harinam party passing it out. They'd be thinking, oh, maybe there's drugs in it, I don't want to touch that, We don't know what kind of standard it was cooked in. So people may be suspicious. So sometimes devotees, they do other things, like, for example, a couple of weeks' time, we will do an Om Sweet Om vegan all-you-can-eat. Now, although the devotees are not necessarily vegan, we understand that if we make vegan preparations, then nobody's excluded. So we don't want to exclude anyone from Krishna Prasad, Krishna's mercy. So people come along for that, and they get a good deal, a very good deal, get a great feast, and they don't pay too much for it. So, and it's a kind of dressed down thing. We're not hiding that we're devotees because we also offer, after the meal, we offer a kirtan taster session if they want to stay behind and take part in that, and most of them do. And from that, they get an opportunity. They've had prasadam, they're purified, they get an opportunity to chant. And sometimes we don't chant Hare Krishna to begin with, because if they're new to it and they're simply coming for the food and they're going to give a try for the meditation, then we start off with like Hari Om, Om Namo Narayan, like that. And then as they start to get experience and they drop their guard and they trust, they get a good feeling about it, then we can bring in Hare Krishna. And then the Maha Mantra is like, opens doors wide. And then they don't know what's happened to them. I remember we did one festival in Hull. Hull is in the east coast of northern England, East Yorkshire. And we had a lot of students come. We had over 200 people come to the festival. It was in a community centre. Does anybody know Hull? Not too far, yeah. It's on the coast. So it was Hessel Road Community Centre. And so many students came, and so many members of the public came as well. It was a nice working class community. People were very helpful, friendly, giving donations towards the feast that we were cooking, etc. And they were allowing us to put posters in their shops and whatnot. Very friendly Yorkshire folks. What was it they say about Yorkshire? God's own people, something like that, or God's own country. Of course, anyway, it's not that they're exclusively, God's own people. Everyone likes to think they are, even us. But everybody is God's people. So anyway, we had the festival, and some student publication, a Students' Union magazine came out, and somebody did a report on the festival, and they said, don't bother with the drugs, just go to the Garanga festival, it's better than anything. And they said they went there not knowing what to expect. They said, but this was better than anything we've ever done. And the Kirtan was just amazing. Everybody really bought into it. And that wasn't an isolated incident. This would happen from time to time. And that's because you can't get, back to what Thakur said, there's no bliss in the material world. So what we're doing when we have programs with Kirtans, then we're basically trying to give people the opportunity to connect with the spiritual world. We are entrusted emissaries of this Parampara, all of us. And we are like ambassadors of the spiritual world. So the more we absorb that spiritual world through hearing, chanting, respecting prasadam, Shishikonitai Pushashiki Jai. The more we become absorbed in Krishna consciousness ourselves, then the more people will be able to benefit from our association. And it's not like we're so advanced that I'm benefiting you by my association. I'm such a benevolent benefactor. You're fortunate to have my association. Do you know that? Do you know who I am? It's not like that. We also feel like, wow, there go I, but by the grace of God. It's only by Krishna's mercy that I'm not still out there doing all the crazy stuff that everyone else is doing. And we can also relate to them. We think, well, I was also caught up in whatever else you're caught up. But and I thought I could never do it, but here I am. Look, I remember, yeah. Sorry. Of course. Yeah. Certainly, yeah.
And then there were some bread with eggs in it. So, and then the man, he wanted me to take, he handed me a piece of the stuff with eggs in it, just to taste. And I said, oh, no, sorry, I don't eat eggs. But I didn't take it in a nice way. I was like, oh, I don't eat eggs.
Oh, yeah.
I really rejected it, But he was trying to be nice.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of reacting back to me, he handed me another bread without it. He was like, oh, this is without anything.
Well, so you learned from that?
I was like, it was very valuable because sometimes I don't believe it's not. But you can learn from it.
Yeah, thank you. It's a nice story, that, because we can learn that sometimes they behave better than us, but at the same time, it's not that they're better than us, because they're unfortunate. We're fortunate, and we can learn, oh, I could have been nicer to that person. The person was trying to show some kindness, and I was so caught up in my regulative principles that I shut them down. So we can learn. We start to kind of program ourselves to think how to do that in the future. So what would you do if it was the opportunity was there again in the same situation? What would you do? Yeah.
So I would say the same thing, but not in that tone. Also, thank you so much. You're very kind, but I don't eat eggs. It's okay. It's like just saying the same,
That's right,
but
yeah.
without speaking harshly. Yeah.
And it's good to actually educate ourselves on these things, because it won't be the last time that will happen. So Theo, well, thanks very much. That's very kind of you, but I've got some dietary restrictions. I can't eat eggs. So you're not like I'm better than you. What are you doing making things with eggs? Don't you know eggs are bogus? So we're kind of, we're not looking down on the person. And we're making them, when Prabhupada went to America at first, he lived with the Agarwal family in Butler, Pennsylvania. And they had alcohol in the house, and they had meat in the house, and they were smoking in the house. And Sally Agarwal, who incidentally is on her deathbed at the moment, Sally Agarwal, who was Prabhupada's host, and her husband, can't remember his name, do you remember? Gopal Agarwal, that's right. So they were the sponsors to bring Prabhupada to the West. So the whole Western world has like a great debt to them because they hosted Prabhupada to come to the West. So anyway, they understood that sadhus don't generally live in a house where there's smoking and drinking and all that going on. And they were apologizing. And Prabhupada says, I'll think nothing of it. And she said, Prabhupada was like the most wonderful person, that they could ever meet. He was the most gracious guest. He never made them feel bad about anything. So right from the beginning, Prabhupada has shown us the example. We shouldn't be judgmental on others. We shouldn't try to make it seem like we're exclusive or we're better than them. And it's a very good story you're given there, that whole principle of see the good in the person and yet still maintain our own principle. So, because some people may lose their discrimination, say, oh, that's great, thanks very much, I'll take that, and then they eat it, knowing, because the sentimental thing, I don't want to disturb them, so I'll just eat it, and then go away feeling, I broke the principles. So we have to achieve both, which is to thank the person, make the person feel appreciated, that they offered some kindness, and at the same time, we're educating them, because they say, why you can't eat eggs? If we say it nice, thanks very much, for your kindness, but I can't eat eggs. And not even like I don't, but I can't. And they say, why not? It's what I've taken a vow. Oh, really? Why would you take a vow not to eat eggs? Well, I'm a devotee of Krishna, and these are some of the things we don't do. So you're not saying you shouldn't do it either. We're just saying this is what we do. And then it causes them to ask more questions. Yeah, and there's always, as they say, every day is a school day, where if we want to learn something, we can learn something every day from everybody. And sometimes Krishna will even speak to us through a non-devotee. I remember being on Sankirtan in Edinburgh, on Princess Street, and it was so busy. It's just like a stampede of elephants, and you're trying to stop them. And I had just been shaved up that day, and it was a hot day. And so I know that if I don't cover my head, I'm going to get sunburned. It's going to be very painful, so I had to put a woolly hat on. And there was too much salt in the kitchery, and I had no opportunity to drink water. So I was dehydrating, and nobody would stop. I was suffering. I was praying to Krishna. I was getting them quite kind of somewhat feeling intimidated and disempowered. And one old lady came up to me and says, "Just be bold." She said, "Everyone else is bold, so you be more bold." And I thought, this is bold, be bold. Everyone else is bold, so you be more bold. And I thought, this is Krishna answering my prayers, because I was praying, what to do, just can't get anywhere here. And then I took it that, if I follow this instruction and I engage people in taking books, she gets the benefit of carrying that instruction. So this is what Sankirtan does for you. It helps to develop that mood of how we can benefit people, even if they won't give anything. Oh, I've only got a penny. What's a penny? Oh, yes, give your penny. That's okay. Therefore, we have to use every penny in Krishna consciousness. And if people give us good advice and we follow it, they get the benefit, because we're making advancement. And if we engage more people on account of their instruction, then they get so much benefit for that. So all the books I did that day, when I was ready to think, okay, pack it in, all the books I did that day, and subsequently, on account of remembering that instruction, that old lady gets the benefit. And Krishna saw fit to use her as a vehicle. So he thought, let me show some mercy on this soul today. And she was another living entity wandering throughout the universe, thinking, I'm Mrs. McTavish walking down the street. I belong to Edinburgh. I'm a Scottish woman with my kids and my grandkids. And she's forgetting she's a spirit soul, eternally related to Krishna. But now she's getting opportunities. So for all we know, she could be sitting in a temple by now, chanting Hare Krishna. So we shouldn't we shouldn't minimize the value of the mercy of this Krishna conscious movement through people getting a book. Prabhupada said even if they touch a book, they're benefited, because these books are like deities. Some temples, they have them on the altar. There's even one temple which doesn't have deities, they have the books. That's their deities. So they're so, and that's why we have a raised platform. We never leave a book lying down like that. It's like, yeah, you wouldn't put just prasadam on the floor. If people put prasadam on the floor, it's such a disrespect. So we don't, when we're talking about taking prasadam, we're getting to that time now, then we don't talk about, let's grab some grub, or let's various words like nosh or scran. What other kind of slang words are used for food? I don't know. What words do you know for food, apart from prasad?
In French, there's a word, a slang, which is not very nice. For food, it's like la bouffe. It really means like that to me, it implies that you're not grateful and you take it for granted, that food, it's like, it's just to stuff yourself,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Stuffing yourself.
Stuff yourself. Like, yeah. And that word buffet, probably the word buffet comes from that. Buffet.
Oh, yeah.
That would come from that, wouldn't it?
Oh, what does it mean?
Buffet. Buffet means like as many dishes made out and you just go and take as much as you want.
I'm not sure.
But you call it buffet.
Because buffet is kind of a nice thing, so I don't know. I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah, but okay, maybe it's not etymologically connected, but one way it is connected is you're saying, stuff yourself.
Oh, yeah.
So when there's a buffet, you can eat unlimitedly, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
You can take, it's like when people go to a restaurant and they say free salad bar, some people are like this with a salad, and then they just get some small thing. Or when you go to a buffet and there's just so much amazing food there, even at our temples. Sometimes our temples, especially in India, I've seen they have some amazing buffets with like 20 odd preparations. You think, well, by the time I take a spoonful of everything here, which I want to taste, I'll be full. So in some ways, just having simple prasadam is more satisfying, because you can have a plate of the same thing and enjoy it, rather than the mind's to satisfy, like, oh, I can't have much of that, and I really like it, I need to eat this and that. And you're eating this, but you're thinking of that. And when you're eating that, you're thinking of that. And then when you're getting near the end of the plate, you're thinking, okay, I'm nearly finished this, but I wonder if there's any more samosas up there at the table. Who's that? Okay, there's too many people standing in the queue. So therefore, sometimes the servers of prasadam are the most satisfied, because they've already accepted, okay, if there's not much left, I'll just take it as prasadam, whatever's there. And then they actually, because the whole idea of taking prasadam is to connect with Krishna. So whether we get a plate of everything we want to the exact quantity we want, or whether all that's left is a bit of rice and a bit of fruit salad or something, if we're in the right consciousness, we accept it as prasadam. If you look at it as mundane food, then we start to disrespect prasadam. We don't see it as Krishna's mercy. It's like, to think that the holy name is some kind of mundane chanting thing, like, what's his name? I can't remember his name offhand, but one famous American hippie poet, he was favourable, and he did help the movement, and he certainly helped Prabhupada. He had a great respect for Prabhupada, but his interpretation of the Maha Mantra was a very kind of mundane thing. He was talking about, that's, how did he describe it again? I can't remember. It was just, he's a very intelligent person. He was using big words, but it was all just very kind of intellectual platform. It wasn't in the spiritual platform. But when you hear Prabhupada describe the Maha Mantra, he talks about how this immediately puts one in contact with the spiritual platform. Okay, it makes it simple and understandable for everyone. But sometimes people try to be too intelligent and they actually miss the point. So these transcendental books, the holy name, even sometimes people don't like to hear the holy name, but they're hearing it anyway. They get to hear it, so they're getting benefited. sometimes people won't stop and take a book. If they don't do that, they don't touch the book or give a donation, then they don't get so much benefit. They actually get, Prabhupada mentions in the first canto, Srimad Bhagavatam, that by seeing a devotee perform devotional service, one is automatically raised to the mode of goodness. One has already benefited. So just by, even people think sometimes when we're on the street we're a nuisance, it's just because we are kind of interfering with their plan to enjoy. But they're getting benefited by seeing us there. So we shouldn't think, even if we go out on books and we do nothing, we haven't done nothing. People have seen us, oh, there's those Hare Krishnas again, they've chanted in their mind. Or like, oh, why don't you Hare Krishnas go and get a real job? Sometimes they'll say that, like that. But we're getting great, you've chanted, thanks. Yeah, and then also with Harinam, sometimes we see, like yesterday, you possibly see it can be quite polarized. People are really happy to see the devotees, and sometimes people join in it as well. So that means, soon they'll be leading the Harinam and people will be joining them as well. That's how it works. They're joining the Parampara. Just like I was speaking to one of our friends at Om Sweet Om last night, who told me that she used to meet the devotees in Glasgow, and sometimes she would be thinking oh, I need to get away from these people, but she was somewhat attracted as well. And now she's finding herself chanting, reading, and the attraction to Krishna is there because the seed was planted. So just like this is another reason why we have to be tolerant and patient, is that we're planting seeds and we can't expect them to grow overnight. If you see something growing overnight, it's probably a weed. I had that experience when I was about 4-year-old. My mother gave me some seeds, said, okay, George, go and plant these in the back garden. I says, what is it? She says, if you plant these, flowers will come up. So I planted them. A few days later, all these things sprung up. And I says, oh, Mum, look, they're up. She says, no, that's weeds. I says, no, that's my flowers. That's where I planted them. She says, no, but that's the weeds. You have to take them out. I'm not taking them out. It's my flowers. I was really attached to it. And, I couldn't believe it. I thought, did she not believe me? I put them there. I did. And I was kind of watching every day to see what was happening with them. And then finally, the other flowers come up. So sometimes we recognize some weed as a flower, but when a devotee comes along who's got more experience and say, no, that's not the flower you're looking for, that's the weed, we should be thinking, okay, let me listen to this, because this person has already traversed the path a bit longer and further than I have, even though my senses are telling me this is what I think it is. Then Krishna, as we're saying earlier on, is beyond the range of the senses. So he reveals himself when we put faith in the devotees. Now, as long as the devotee is not doing anything to, which is not doing anything which is contrary to devotional principles, then we can have faith. Sometimes people say, oh, well, how can I have faith in this one? They're like that or like that. It's not a matter of personal idiosyncrasies. But if the person's is following, they're chanting Hare Krishna. When we come to the temple, it's like coming to a spiritual hospital. We're all in the process of getting better. So if we don't want someone to expect us to be completely perfect overnight, then we can't expect others to be as well. So therefore we also have to learn to tolerate that we may not all be perfect examples, but we're trying. And Prabhupada, he supports this. He says one should seek out the association of a pure devotee or devotees. So it's not like, well, I can only associate with a pure devotee and I don't see any around. So that means you're putting yourself that you're the person who can spot a pure devotee and you don't see any, so what does that make you? And Prabhupada says the association of the worst devotee is better than the association of the best non-devotee. Of course, if we have the opportunity, then we... and Rupa Goswami explains how we associate with different levels of devotees too. So I think we better stop here. Sorry, I went over a bit. Any questions, comments?
Thank you for the class. How can one stop identifying with the body when the body is experiencing pain? There's another bit too.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Who's asking it?
Laura.
Laura. Thanks, Laura. Nice to see you today on the camera.
There's another section. Should I continue? There's another part to the question.
Certainly, yeah. You want to ask the whole question?
Do we have to be at an elevated state to not allowing the suffering of the body to interfere with our progress?
Yeah, it's a very good question, actually, and it pertains to everybody. And so just repeat the question again so I can understand it.
How can one stop identifying with the body when the body is experiencing pain?
Okay, so just the first part of the question is, Krishna explains Matra sparshas Caitanya, Shitoshna, Sukadukada, Agama Paino, Nityas, Tamstitikashwa Bharata, Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, text 14. So Matra sparshas, so sparshas means contact with the sense objects, or it means the sense perception. Shitoshna, Sita and Ushna is winter and summer seasons. Shitoshna, Sukha, Dukkha, Da. Sukha is happiness and Dukkha is distress. Agama Paino Nityas, Tams Tatiksha Shavarataha. So Tatiksha means tolerate. So the happiness and distress, Sukha Dukkha, are different sides of the same coin. We're concerned with tolerating distress naturally because the living entity is anandamaya, pleasure-seeking, so we don't want to suffer. Why would anybody want to suffer? Even a masochist, they want to enjoy their suffering, don't they? So in one sense, it's a kind of perverted type of wanting to enjoy. So we're very much concerned with not suffering, naturally. But when we're enjoying, we don't consider that we have to tolerate that. So this is instruction gives. He doesn't just say Shitoshna Dukkada. He says Shitoshna Sukha Dukkada. So we have to, in order for the mind to become steady, we have to learn to see, as our old friend George Harrison said, all things must pass. So when we're experiencing some material affluence or happy situation, when we become too much invested in that, then equally we'll be invested in any suffering which comes also. So the idea is to become steady in both, understanding that both are temporary, that this will pass. When we're enjoying, it's a great time, we think, oh, I wish this could last forever, because we know intrinsically it won't. And the more we become tolerant of happiness, then the more we'll be also able to see that this suffering we're going through is temporary. So some temporary things, it may be for a few minutes, maybe for a day or a week or a month, or some things may be a whole life. We may have something which we have to tolerate our whole life. And some people just can't, they spend their whole life just trying to avoid the suffering. And naturally, we want to try to find ways and means to reduce our suffering, but sometimes we have to learn to live with it. And as we become more Krishna conscious, then the suffering will diminish. And this is of the various symptoms of a pure devotee, as that one is relieved from all material distress. So suffering can be an impetus for us to be more Krishna conscious. And also to be careful not to become too invested in material happiness. One devotee said to Prabhupada, I'm very excited about such, and Prabhupada said, this excitement is not such a good thing. Because excitement, is more on the kind of sensual, the platform of the mind and the senses. So when we talk about sensual, we don't mean like sexual, we mean any kind of investment of the mind and the senses, and something other than Krishna conscious. So certainly we make endeavors to become free from our suffering. We try to mitigate it because it can be overwhelming to the mind. But then the cure is always, even though we may do that, we can't necessarily be sure that whatever we're pursuing is going to cure our suffering. Just like I have a bad back, I've had it for some years, and I've tried everything under the sun, and it's still there, and I have to learn to live with it. For some reason, I've got some reaction, and I'm suffering because of it daily, practically minute by minute. And some days it's worse than others. And as I get older, there's other things. My shoulders gone, my hands gone. Continually there's restrictions and pains. And I'm thinking, actually, I'll give a nice story. So there was one man decided he wanted to become, because Yamaraj is the Lord of Death, he thought, well, let me become friends with Yamaraj. And then when the time comes to die, then because I'm his friend, I won't be in trouble. So he approached Yamaraj and he says, can I be your friend? He says, oh, yes, of course. He says, okay, could I ask you one thing? What's that? He says, when I'm getting close to death, can you write me a letter and tell me? He says, yeah, I can do that. No problem. So the man went about happily living his life. And then death came and he found himself in the court of Yamaraj. He says, what am I doing here? I thought you were going to write me a letter. He says, didn't you get the letters? He says, no. He says, yeah, I sent you a letter, when your teeth were falling out. That was the first letter I sent you. And then when you got your lumbago, that was another letter I sent you. And then when your eyesight started to fail and your hairs were growing grey, there's another 2 letters I sent you. So it's how we look at the suffering. If we look at the suffering and it's difficult to do, it's not that we should become callous to another suffering, like some devotees suffering, say, it's okay, it's Krishna's mercy. We just brush it off, that's callous. We can understand that people are suffering, we're all suffering. Prabhupada says suffering's everyone's problem. And because we're individual spirit souls, we're not all homogeneous oneness, then Prabhupada also explains that we experience the pains and pleasures of our body, but we don't experience the pains and pleasures of another's. I don't experience someone else's karma. I'm experiencing my karma. So it can be an impetus to take shelter in Krishna, where we realize actually there is no happiness in this material world. Bhaktivinoda Thakur said there's no bliss in this world other than the holy name and the devotees, then there's no bliss. And we try to find bliss in the material world, then we generally find not Ananda but near Ananda, which doesn't mean to say near is near, it's close to Ananda, it's near, as in not, like Nirvana, Nirguna. It is not blissful. We can get some temporary happiness from it. So we can be compassionate to other person's suffering, and sometimes it's said that if you help someone else get to the top of a hill, you automatically get there yourself. So even though we are, I'll give you an example, which is a really amazing example. Mother Ratnaranjini, who lived here years ago, Prabhupada disciple, she had a brain tumor, and she was quite slim built, but because of the tumor and because of the medicine, then she became quite bulky. And her head was swollen, even to sometimes the extent that blood would come out of her eyes. She was suffering terribly. And her mood was, and this is perhaps the second part of your question, it's a very, very elevated level, but it's there to show us that it's possible. And we too can be on that platform if we want to take shelter in the same way. Now, she was given so much medication to kill the pain. She said, I don't want to actually take painkillers. I want to suffer my karma, suffer my lot, and go back to Godhead. I don't want to come back. So she had made that very firm determination. And one time, my wife had a cold, and Mother Ranjini's lying on her bed, dying of cancer. And she says, oh, Karan Sindhu, how are you today? I heard you had a cold. Are you feeling better? So that brings tears to your eyes, such compassion, even though she's suffering greatly. She's not concerned about her suffering. She's, well, how are you? And actually, this is how it works also, is when you become concerned with relieving other people's suffering, just as by helping someone get to the top of a hill, you relieve your own. Because a good part of the suffering, Prabhupada said, is the mind. Not that it's not there, but it's the mind is focusing on it. For example, many times when I was on Sankirtan, especially in the winter time, well, actually in the winter time when it was really cold, and your feet are so cold you can't even bend your ankles, and you're out there all day in the freezing cold, sometimes wet or whatever, and it's quite austere. And your mind would be freaking out. But what you usually find is, as soon as someone stopped and you're interacting with them, selling them a book, you weren't even aware of your bodily situation again. So that became an impetus to, okay, at least even to get out of my miserable condition, let me try to stop more people. And so therefore, when we engage in devotional service, the cause of suffering in this world is material cause, and the solution is a spiritual solution. So therefore, when we're suffering, we don't cut back on our Krishna consciousness. We increase on it, more chanting, more reading, and if you need to, then more prasad. If you've got to take shelter and comfort food, offer it to Krishna. Just make sure it's offerable. So we also have to be careful not to act on a platform which is beyond us and accept suffering unnecessarily. Sometimes people will say, well, I'll just take it as my karma and I won't take medicine. But then if we don't take medicine, we get worse, then that may impact on our ability to do service. We're here to serve Lord Chaitanya's mission. So we do what we can to try to make ourselves well enough to do what we can to serve. And if by trying everything which is available to us, it doesn't improve or only improves slightly, we still just try to do what we're able to do. We don't give up our Krishna consciousness to simply try to mitigate our material miseries. And on the other hand, also, we don't neglect looking after the body, because just like if you have a car and it needs some oil and you think, well, I bought it with oil in it, if it runs out, too bad, it'll go to the scrap heap. You'd put some oil in it. And if there's something wrong with the car, we'll take care of it so something else doesn't go wrong. So sometimes we have to learn to live with something if we've tried everything and it doesn't change. And to live with it in such a way it doesn't disturb our mind, then we have to keep on taking our mind more to Krishna. So I hope that helps. Anything else?
Learn to tolerate more chanting and trying to go deeper to get closer to Krishna. I am not important, Krishna is.
That's it. And so in this way, because the suffering is connected with our bodily identification, then the more we identify as a devotee, associate with devotees, do devotee activities, then the less we'll be identifying with the body. So it's... Of course, we have to make ourselves presentable. It's not that you need to decide, well, I'm never looking in the mirror again because I don't want to see that face and remind myself that I'm the body. We can look in the mirror and think, I'm not this body. We don't have to look in the mirror and think, I'm this body. How do I make it nicer? So hearing, this is the recommendation, that by regular hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam, all that is inauspicious is gradually destroyed to zero. So suffering also can be impetus to remember Krishna. So we try to utilize everything in Krishna service. Even on the extreme level, then a devotee sees death as Krishna coming in the form of liberation, whereas a materialist sees death as the end to all their plans. Just like we have Caitanya, he's a great devotee, and he's, by all external appearances, he's heading out of this world, and he's confident that he's going back to Godhead. He's looking forward to it. But many people who are in his situation who weren't devotees, they'd be completely morose, but he's ecstatic. And Prabhupada guarantees we chant the rounds, follow regulative principles, and read the books, these other activities, eat prasadam, then we go back to Godhead. It's 100% guaranteed. Prabhupada made this deal with Krishna, so Krishna will honor the promise of his devotee. Okay, we better stop there. And thanks for the question and thanks for the opportunity to speak. ISKCON Guru Vrinda ki,
Jai.
Sri Prabhupada ki,
Jai.
Sri Caitanya Caritamrta ki,
Jai.
Untitled Chapter.
Haribol. His Grace Prabhupada Prana Prabhu ki Jai.
Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki.